Okay, 5 seconds.
Good afternoon and welcome to Divurgent's Tech Talk. My name is Emily Carlson and I'm the Vice President of Technology for Divurgent. We're going to get started in approximately 1 minute, but while we wait to get things kicked off, make sure to check out Grubhub. Make sure that you've received your credit and enjoyed lunch on us as we discuss application rationalization. If for some reason you had any issues or have any questions regarding the Grubhub credit, please feel free to reach out to Megan Ellsworth at divurgent.com. And once again, we're going to get started in approximately 1 minute. All right. Thanks everybody for joining Divurgent's Tech Talk. Today we are going to discuss application rationalization. Again, please do not forget to go out there and enjoy lunch on us. Jose, you want to go ahead and forward a couple slides? Great. And once again, welcome. My name is Emily Carlson. I'm the Vice President of Technology for Divurgent. I am over the executive oversight for the technology team here at Divurgent. And I have a couple of my fantastic team members on the line with me today to talk about application rationalization. Mike and Jose, would you like to do a quick intro?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jose Maldonado, Senior Manager on the technology team here at Divurgent, also Microsoft SME. Been in IT 15 plus years, specializing in various Microsoft technologies.
Okay, Mike.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Mike Bright. I work with the technology team as well, one of our Microsoft subject matter experts, and also have about 15 years in specifically healthcare IT experience.
Great. Well, thanks you guys for joining. I'm looking forward to our discussion today. Jose, if you want to go forward a couple slides. You know, it seems that application rationalization has very quickly become a very hot topic of conversation. I think, part of that is just the financial impact that it can make to an organization. But I really wanted to hear your perspectives on what you feel application rationalization really means. So what do you guys think? What is truly at its core? What is application rationalization? What do you think?
For me, it's really kind of understanding the landscape of your environment, understanding what's out there. Not only that, but who owns it, who's managing it, what are the costs to the organization, both financially and environmentally. How much space does that take in your data center? I mean, there's so many different pieces to this, but it's to me, it's about knowing what's out there and who's in charge or responsible for maintaining it.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Mike. I think application rationalization is key, is very important. It can be obviously in a project and operation within itself, right? So over time, we've seen where when we're doing operating system deployments and migrations and upgrades, the application rationalization goes along with that, right? The issue is, all right, so how much time do we plan for application rationalization? I've been on projects where the companies had 8,000 software titles, and somehow we got that down to 2,700, right? But the goal was to migrate from Windows XP at that time to Windows 7. But you could see how much time it would take to be able to go from 8,000 software titles down to 2,700. So it's something that every organization needs to plan for, regardless of the size of the organization. And it's not always a part of, at this point in this day and age, some other operating system deployment or migration.
Yeah, and I think, Jose, that's a very good point. So typically, from our experience, this team's experience, it's always been part of a larger initiative. But now I think more than ever, we have to look at ways to reduce costs for organizations. And one way to do so, to your point, to take 8,000 applications to 2,700, that reduction in software titles, not only does that make a difference in your infrastructure, but let's talk about support and licensing fees that are associated with that many applications. That's a lot to catalog and to support for any organization of any size.
And that's what makes the framework of the app rat so important, right? So I look at it nowadays, which I think that a lot of companies did not do so in the past, where you have the amount of planning that goes into application rationalization is equally as important as the bigger cog of the operating system deployment. It just is, because you can't support the new OS, right, with legacy applications or applications that are not supported with that new OS, right? But the more you dig, the more you find applications, zombie applications, rogue applications, 5, 6 different versions of the same, right?
Yeah, yeah, very true. Yeah, and one thing in thinking about truly the past year, and how reactionary and responsive we've had to be to changing our work structures, our work environment, and the technology that's been required to support those. Now that we're kind of starting to be steadier state, we truly work at home. I think now is also a good time to go back and see what we did over the course of the past year. Did we quickly implement one collaboration tool, because it was quick to implement and we could flip the switch overnight, but yet we already own licensing under an enterprise agreement or some other license structure out there. So I think even just over the course of the past few months, we've had to quickly react, which has caused redundancy to just naturally and inherently occur within the infrastructure. What do you guys think about that?
That's a good point, right? So basically, what it seems like to me is it's almost all a similar framework. So during COVID, when COVID first hit, we had a lot of organizations scrambling, right? They're trying to get their hands on equipment, hardware, laptops. And then, the supply dried up. So now we had supply chain issues, and companies couldn't procure the hardware needed. So they were literally running into retail big box stores to be able to fulfill the need. But then that created an issue where now we have, let's say 10, 15 new models which require, driver management. So at some point you have to do the cleanup. Now, that could be an easier cleanup than an application rationalization, right? And I think that unlike the case, the scenario that you just brought up, when you bring in new hardware, let's say because of COVID, and some of these are consumer brands or just, models that you would not have in your fleet otherwise. So you do have to kind of do some sort of management, whether at that point or later on, for drivers and the like. I think applications falls by the wayside. I think we get into the habit of, hey, this department needs this application now, and because that department for some reason, right, needs this particular software, or it will impact the business, we run out and purchase it, or they purchase it themselves, right? So now we have to figure out how to support it. But a year goes by, we forget that we have these software titles out there, and it isn't until we go to dig through something we realize, wait a minute, we have 3,000-4,000 applications, but we have 7 versions of applications that meet the same business capabilities, right? But so now the licensing and the cost of that. Then if we are moving to a new operating system, there are costs associated with upgrading to the newer version or the compatible version for that would match that operating system. So those are challenges, right? And I think that there's something where CIOs lose the flavor for it once they see the increase, right, in the cost, the upfront cost. But we also know that if we do this correctly. In the end, there's a cost savings, which we're going to get into in the next couple slides. I'm sorry, I probably jumped ahead, Emily. I got so excited.
No, that's fine. And I think so. I think too, you bring up a very good point. It's there's so many siloed interactions that occur. Taking the time from an enterprise perspective. Not just each individual business unit, but taking it in from an enterprise level. You would probably be surprised at all of the little shadow IT, and we have that up here as one of actually the drivers, is that organizations have this shadow IT all over the place, where there's redundant applications. They serve the same purpose, but they've had the ability and capability to go out and purchase what they feel is best for their business unit, and now you end up with 7 collaboration tools or something of that nature. So I think also the importance with application rationalization is looking at it from the enterprise view, that enterprise perspective, because there you'll be able to break down those shadow IT groups and have a truly broader view of what your infrastructure and your inventory truly looks like.
Yeah, I have a pop quiz for Mike.
So you ready, Mike?
So of the bulleted drivers here, right, for AppRat on the screen, which one you think is the scariest?
I don't know about scariest, but one that can definitely take a lot of time and some complexity to kind of peel back the layers is the merger and acquisition piece. So a good example of that. So let's say, and I'm going to stick with healthcare because that's kind of what I know, but let's say 2 healthcare entities merged, 2 healthcare or hospital systems, patient care type places. We've got 2 different versions of PACS being run on each of these health systems. Same vendor, but different version numbers. And there is some kind of enterprise. What I'm looking for, what's the word I'm looking for here? It's some kind of dependency on that version to be running in the environment. So now you've got to somehow understand how to have these 2 different versions of the same software running in now a merged environment. So that can add a lot of complexity. So if you don't know what those dependencies are or what's out there, or if you haven't well cataloged what updates and what versions your existing supported software is currently at, you're not going to know. You're not going to have the information you need to be successful to make that happen. So that's part of it as well, making sure the documentation and the sustainability of what you're cataloging remains up to date. It's not a one-time exercise. It's kind of a recursive, kind of reoccurring project that kind of continues to go once it's been set in motion. So I think that's one that's particularly tricky to navigate through as mergers.
And Mike, you bring up a good point. So now think about having to operationally support those varying versions in the environment. How many resources does that require just to be able to support the varying versions?
Yep. Yeah. And if you accidentally upgrade one version to the non-expected version, you break 3 or 4 applications in the process, and you've got to go back and do the rework. Yeah. It's information to all your support staff.
Yeah. And that's happened, right? And when you talk about mergers and acquisitions, the thing is, technically you have 2 IT organizations with 2 different trains of thought or rationale, right? And now we have to kind of go through that and figure out what's the best route to go in terms of framing out the application rationalization, right? So I think that's a big piece, and that's the tough part, because you can open it up and it's like a attic closet, right? And then it's so messy that you thought you were gonna do spring cleaning, but you said, no, let me close it. It's too messy. We'll revisit it in the fall. And there's nothing like spring cleaning in the fall, right?
Yeah, spring cleaning in the fall is fantastic. So, I think to kind of summarize what we feel, and I'll just, have you guys jump in as we kind of summarize what is application rationalization. It's really a strategic enterprise level initiative to help to remove redundant applications, reduce costs associated with those redundant applications, and come up with a stronger infrastructure catalog. And I'm going to say, ultimately, hopefully, help to get that solid inventory so that in the event there is another merger, you've got a good starting framework. What do you guys think? Good way to summarize that?
Yeah, but so that goes to sustainability, right? So we set up the framework, and then now there's a process. Now there's policies in place. Now if we follow those policies, we'll most likely not end up in the same shape in the future.
Yeah. Want to go to the next slide, Jose? Oh boy.
Sure, I know.
Why do sometimes application rationalizations projects fail?
Because they never get started.
Because they don't get started. I think also to that, a lot of times there's a lot of excitement about an application rationalization project. Everybody realizes that the value and kind of that, what it brings and the cost reduction piece of that. But if you don't continue to gain the engagement and that championing of the project from the C level down and then the team member up, so that two-way communication venue, you're really not being set up for success. I mean, we see that a lot, right, guys, on not just application rationalization projects, but making sure that the lines of communication are crossed the enterprise to keep transparency and that lack of importance for the organization. So I think that is really one thing that when we're thinking about ways to be successful at an app project, is that we want to keep the engagement and the championing from all levels of the organization, visible, of course, across the course of the project.
So how do we achieve that, Emily? I mean, if I am, let's say, director of enterprise applications, right? How do I shape this in a way that I can bring this to my VP, and then now my VP can see the need for this, but also the exit strategy, right? Or the execution strategy, where I bring some sort of framework that it makes it seem like it's drivable, like it's possible, like we can basically coordinates that we've plugged into the GPS, and now my VP can see the destination a little bit clearer than it being blurry. Because I do think that's part of the issue, that the ones we have to go to get the money, right? Or the ones we have to go to that go and get the money for us to complete these things, they somehow don't understand the picture, or they can't make the picture clear for those who are going to sign the checks to make it happen. So how do we do that? Well, what does it look like?
Boy, I think that's a really good question. So, I think that is, it just comes down to the right, I would say, charter and reason why in the impact statements, right? So, Mike, you and I have worked for those larger healthcare organizations where if you don't come with a great why and the WIFMs, if you will, for across the organization, so the what's in it for them for the project, I think instantaneously you won't gain that momentum and engagement. So, if I'm going to, my leadership with a project idea, I want them to understand why it's important to the organization with the benefit or value, that brings. So, I think that's the most important thing, is you want to make sure that you're being transparent into the importance. I think having the cost, some sort of cost estimate is really hard, because a lot of times we don't even have a true inventory of what the applications are in the environment when we get started. One of those first steps, Jose, you talk about framework. One of the first and most difficult pieces is actually getting a true inventory. So a lot of times I think too, it's hard to put a true qualified dollar amount as far as cost savings when you're first starting this engagement. But I think having a good purpose and a good story and being able to tell the value for the organization is a good place to start.
So I agree. The financial aspect of this is extremely important. But I think, inventory every application out there to realize, okay, how many versions do we have of this? I've seen versions of Office that had maybe it's the same version, right? But they're at 10.1.2, then .3, then .4, then .5, right? But then I've seen organizations that they have anywhere between um, Office 2010 all the way to Office 2019, right? So it's kind of spread out. And
Yeah.
then you're talking about, okay, so we have full licenses for Office and then versus, Office 365 licensing. And that's just in the Microsoft Productivity Suite alone.
Yeah.
Not to mention Adobe and then all the other abstract ones. And then, with healthcare, you got clinical applications and this and that. And applications that someone literally designed in a back room somewhere that's out there, right? Depending if there's a license cost to it or not. But even we have to remember there is a cost associated with it taking up storage, right? On the network drives or servers because of the fact that data at this point costs money. We run out of data, we have to purchase more or do whatever we have to do to expand storage, right? So, I mean, we have a client right now that is looking at a storage expansion project, right? Well,
Yep.
there's a history as to how they arrived there, and it's almost as if I have a room that I could have for rent, right? Or I have a rental home and I have 3 rooms rented out, and there's a few things in there hasn't been completely cleaned out. Well, if I were to clean it out, then I can use it, optimize my investment, right? But if I leave it where it's not usable, not rentable, it's taking up space. Technically, on paper, it's costing me money.
Yeah. I'm just glad that you didn't use a car analogy, Jose.
That one's coming in the next slide.
Okay, cool.
Ultimately, it all boils down to cost and complexity, I feel like. But there's some downstream benefits as well. Think about vulnerability patching. So if you don't know it's out there, how do you know to patch it if there's potentially some kind of an exploit? The other thing is training. So you've got to maintain the documentation on each of these applications as the version number changes to make sure that you can train up your end user population as they are onboarded. You also have to retain the talent to do the training and make sure that they're up to speed on all the versions of the application as they change and continue to get updated. So the more complexity you have, the harder it is to complete those and make sure that you're doing a good job on that. So I think that's another driver as well.
But to your point, I think that's why sometimes these projects get stuck and they don't succeed, because there is a lot of that work that goes, there's that minutia that goes with a project like this. And that takes up a lot of time, which takes up a lot of resources. So I think to piggyback onto the driver, that's also why sometimes these projects do not necessarily see it to success, right? Like the projects fizzle over time because there's so much to comb through. And unless you can really dedicate the resources or, really bring in the subject matter expertise to help comb through this, the projects are large. These are not small projects. So I think to your point, Mike, about all of the drivers, you could pivot that to almost say sometimes that's why projects fail, is because there is so much of that to come through.
So that goes back to, Mike, that's a good point. So that goes back to, getting the leadership, right? The people who sign the checks, getting them to understand what it looks like, right? So if we're going to do this, what's the need for it? How do we get started? How many applications are there? What do we do next, right? How do we begin to rationalize? How do we categorize? So the framework is very important, right? So the complexity of it, that's why I think lack of engagement, right? You get stuck right there. I mean, if we had this slide and it only had lack of engagement, it would be extremely relevant because there's so many factors to that. There's layers to complexity layers that you kind of have to remove, and it's almost like Emily just said, we have to go out, possibly bring in a company like Divurgent to help us sift through and apply a framework. And then as we agree on that framework, begin to run through the different processes to be able to even visualize what it will look like. I think leadership gets lost in the weeds because they really can't see the project completing successfully. They see it dropping off somewhere because of the complexities, especially in healthcare.
Yeah, and going back to the engagement piece too, I mean, business continuity is a huge thing. So let's say, for example, finance is using an application that does the same thing as something that's being used in central scheduling. Which one of those applications is going to win? Each different department's going to have their own reasons why they should continue to keep on with the application that they have to not interrupt workflow or business continuity. And then at some point, there's going to be a cutover for whatever department does not win their argument. And then that's a slower turnaround times in processing jobs, or just slower productivity in general. So that's another reason to kind of just roll over and keep things as status quo. And you've got to find a way to be able to make both parties happy and get that done without detrimenting or detriment to the business.
And Mike, to your point, Mike, it may be that neither one of those applications are the right application. They might go through the features and functionalities as you're aligning to the workflows for each one of those business units, and find that there's another application that actually would fulfill both of those needs and the use case. And the recommendation could be out of an app wrap project that you actually implement a third party and retire to. So I think it also brings up opportunity to go back and look at the why. Now, again, I'm going to go back to all of that takes time, and all of that takes resource draw on our resources across the enterprise. Again, these, from an enterprise perspective, it takes time for everybody. So being able to, especially right now in healthcare, being able to dedicate the internal resources to a project like this can just be, really, really difficult.
Yeah, so that goes back to an analogy that I brought up. I think during our waking up with Windows 10.
Oh, you're going back old school.
I'm taking you guys back. Okay,
oh,
so
man.
So we talked about Windows 10, right? And the framework of that sort of deployment or migration, right? So I mentioned the fact that application rationalization is an important piece of it, and then why. The analogy that I used was I could be wanting to take a road trip to California, let's say San Diego, and San Diego happens to be 26 hours from me. Okay, so I know that I'm probably not going to drive 26 hours, right? So then we have to account for the time that I may have to stop and rest. So I do know that my gas tank won't drive 24 or 26 hours, right, without refueling. So then I have to take time out or add time to the road trip to allot for that. Then there's stopping to eat and things of that nature. So application rationalization deserves, right, the proper time and planning and so on and so forth. So when you have someone who opens up the door, right? They have a VP or they have a director saying we need to do this, right? And they open up the portfolio of the proposal and they see that the closet is full and messy and junky, and they close it because they don't see a way of somehow beginning to tackle the problem, right? It stays there and the problem continues to exist, and they kind of kick the can further down the road, right? The problem is that whatever was in that proposal, right, for the cost of doing the app wrap, that can change, right? So that's where the lack of timeliness comes in on our slide here, where we could have a point in time cost analysis that will quickly be outdated the more we kick the can down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So what is a good approach? I look at application rationalization as kind of a blended approach to make sure that we have a true methodology in place. I think we talk about that the next slide, but it's not just technical, right? It's not just the technology pieces. It's not just, surveys. It's kind of being able to blend that all together and then bring in, contracts and understand the financial pieces for each one of these applications. So it's, I think, a really good approach to have a great governance committee in place, have those key stakeholders for these projects so that you're getting a cross-enterprise, cross-functional group together from a project perspective, and, have everybody's, voice heard. I think as far as steps and tech that goes into play here, Jose and Mike, you guys can speak to this better than I can, but it's, it's running those scans on the endpoints, and it's not just running them at any one point in time. It's getting your baseline and then running incremental scans over the course of a period of time, all while potentially creating some customized SCCM reports. And while you're looking at that, we all know that there's key areas within an organization that have probably applications that they are web-based that we're not going to catch, or they've got some computer that is no longer really attached on the network, but they use it for some sort of ancillary application, and it's sitting in a corner somewhere. So also taking the time to talk to people, right? Interview them, ask them how they're using their application, so you get a full purview of what's going on for your end users.
I don't see how you can do it without the interviews. I mean, Mike, I don't know if you've done it some other way, but I don't see, especially those applications that are not just your average run-of-the-mill, out of the box sort of applications. Just those that we don't know the types. I've literally been a part of Windows migration projects where during the application rationalization portion, I'm actually testing an application that back then required putting 5 DVDs, right, or like a 10 gigabyte folder to be able to execute or install the software on a VM to do the testing, right? And I had no idea what this did, right? And come to find out, it was for some sort of global mapping and what have you. But it's just something where it becomes very complex. We start figuring out that there's a lot there. So the framework or a playbook, it's almost as if, here it is, we're consultants, right? So there are certain things every once in a while. Some new technology comes out, we have to study, we have to possibly certify in it. But we have to learn it in order for us to be able to incorporate it into our portfolio or offerings, right? But so let's just say if you have an organization or your IT organization does not have a certain expertise. Well, I mean, I suggest and I recommend do the same, right? If you're not going to bring in an outside company, can we send some of our guys out to certain seminars, right? Certain training where, some of the top leaders in some of the third-party software or even Microsoft technologies, let's get them up to speed and then come back to the fold and let's figure out certain pieces of the let's say application rationalization. But I want to go to the next slide before I get too far into that to kind of bring my point home. And that is, so let's say, so frame, right? So steps into success with application rationalization initiatives, right? So we talked about the framework. The framework is extremely important. I think we've mentioned that word probably about 45 times so far.
I'm trying to keep track of it over here, Jose.
And I don't want to lose anybody, right? But so there's a way to go about this where we can break it down into smaller chunks. Emily will throw out the term low-hanging fruit, but I'm going to tell you that's probably your best bet. So if we can somehow eliminate certain apps from the environment, right? Start looking at what apps that we are retired, right? But for some reason they're still in operation. Or do we have dev or test environments? Do we have multiple versions? And we can start with the most familiar of applications, right? So that we don't get too lost. And maybe even do it almost like a pilot, Emily, almost doing like a smaller version of application rationalization so that we can somehow see how successful we are based on the framework that we have, right? But just break it down into smaller chunks if need be. You can digest it easier and understand it better. And I think now you can create a bigger playbook for all the rest of the applications. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, and I think you've got catalog here. So I just want to spend a minute on catalog because I think one of the most difficult things to get to is what actually your inventory or catalog of applications is in your environment. And so think about it. If you think about not only, thick install on an endpoint, but also those web apps that they're accessing and how those web apps are being accessed. You know, sometimes not all the tools get those, right, Jose? I mean, we do our best to get everything via those map scans and the SCCM reporting, but that's where we go back to the end user conversations and why those are so important in order to get to the full catalog. Now,
okay, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, so now we have to in creating a catalog, right? You have to create categories. So then how do you create the categories? It's easy to say, okay, so these are your basic productivity. This is graphic. This is for graphics, or you could do it by department. But then, certain applications have certain attributes. So are you going to characterize the categorize the attributes of an application? So this is why the planning is so important, right? But I think that if we had to go in and grab the low-hanging fruit and say, hey, for the next 5 weeks, we're going to look at these 20 core applications, right? And then we start there. Then if applying that model, if our model works, then we know that we can go ahead and move on to a broader scale, in terms of application rationalization. If not, right, we can always expand on the actual on the model, right, or modify it, remediate, whatever have you, to make it fit, right? So that's the thing. Your model has to fit your environment.
Yeah, and you mentioned attributes. I think it's important, not to segue to the next piece here, but to understand the total cost of an application, you really do need to capture some of those attributes. Dependencies is a great one. What other pieces of software are required to make this function? Understanding that and knowing the overhead to manage that application and to keep it running in your environment, I think is directly impacts the cost. Whether it can be virtualized or not, or if it's already being virtualized, if it's thick installed, if it's cloud hosted, what are the other dependencies that belong to that application that could incur a cost or overhead to manage?
Yeah, and I think that if you want to get a CIO's or VP of technologies attention, right, when you're doing a presentation regarding something like this, if you bring up costs, I've seen Emily do this. We've had to do this where say, okay, this is what it seems like you guys are spending, right, on this particular portion of things in your IT segment, right, or in the organization. And then we show there's a cost savings, an average cost savings of this, right? So when you apply this 15%, 20%, I've seen companies up to 35% in cost savings to an application rationalization. All of a sudden, you see the antennas going up, right? Yeah. And now they're listening. Before, they thought it was just, technical mumbo jumbo. You talk numbers, now you're talking turkey.
Yeah, and the other thing is, guys, it's funny because we're looking at this now where, previously, in order to have appropriate security measures in place, you'd have to have a Carbon Black, you'd have to have Defender, you'd have to have 6 different tools, basically security pieces in your environment. But now, you can look at the features and functionalities of just what Defender, put into place. You can get rid of Carbon Black. It takes time and there's a license up, but when you look at the license up cost and implementation, you're still saving a significant amount of money. And now your security team only has to monitor Defender. So even at that security level, again, I go back to that low hanging fruit, Jose, that might be the perfect, pilot, if you will, for an organization to see, yeah, okay, let's keep going with this because we see the value. We saw how quickly we could recognize, a cost savings within our infrastructure space. Even little things like that all comes out of those conversations and looking at the environment and doing the right thing. So I think, it is, again, I'll go enterprise wide, right? And being able to identify pieces in areas where you could achieve that immediate cost savings.
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, this is truly one time that we could actually look into a room, right? Look into their eyes and respond to them when they say, hey, well, maybe we can't afford to. We can say, you can't afford not to.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing I want to talk about here is that sustain box, Jose.
Very important.
Governance. A lot of times, because there hasn't been that governance model in place, and that bleeds to vendor management, by putting this framework together, by having an inventory, by having an ultimate what your environment looks like, having a governance structure in place. So when new applications do need to be acquired, it's not shadow IT making that lone siloed decision. It's a broad cross-functional team that has awareness as to what's coming into the infrastructure. I think that sustain box is so important.
So that's the key. So everything before the sustain portion of this slide is how we get it done, how we begin and how we get everything running and done, right? But how we maintain things so that the closet is not only now organized, but also we can maintain organization. And with different business departments, right, within any organization, things can easily get messy in terms of software, especially when you have those siloed purchases, right? So I do suggest that there should be a policy that all purchases go through the technology department, right? And then if there are those specialty software that certain departments must have every now and again, that someone in that IT department deals specifically with those, so that way they can be expedited, given the proper attention, cataloged, they help test, install, so on and so forth, whatever have you, right? Because we're going to do what? We're going to package all applications within your management tool.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Now packaging them, but Mike, remember we did a client implementation together, and remember the governance structure that they had in place, that the application before purchase went through architecture review. Do you remember that process?
Yeah, there's a navigation process. So and mostly it's just facilitating a conversation about what's being requested with plenty of stakeholders from across the business to either get buy-in as to why it's a good idea or why it's not a good idea to bring this in. It's a good chance to identify any redundancies or extra complexity that may not be necessary, and any security requirements or that it may or may not meet can be flushed out during this process as well. So it's easy to understand or identify whether the application that we're requesting is a good fit for the organization or not. Just conversations.
Yeah.
Can I just tell you how sad I was the first time I got told no, though, through that navigator process?
Yeah, it happens.
I was like, what do you mean we already own something like that?
But that's why I think it's very important that we manage the environment, right? So I think that there should be certain group policies in place where your average user or most users are not administrators on their local workstations, right? So they can't go and install any applications that they want to. Now, don't get me wrong, right? I mean, so we've used SCCM, MMCM to manage these things. So all of the known applications that we know we don't want installed on the workstations, we can create a rule that, hey, if you detect this, I'll just uninstall it, right? But I mean, I remember there was a time where Google Earth for consumers is free of cost, right? But it's not free of cost, or at the time it may have not been for organizations. Well, people were downloading the consumer Google Earth and using it inside the business, right? So Google caught a whiff and the organization got a call from Google, said, hey, listen, you're in violation of this, that, and the other. And then there had to be a policy put in place that, hey, you guys cannot download Google Earth. But, I'm not a security person, but in terms of group policy, instead of having to police your users or do regular audits, which we're going to do anyhow, right? I would rather set things in place where they can't do damage or they can't download or install things that can create some sort of liability for the organization. And I think that's the other side of it as well when we're talking about sustain, right?
Yeah.
Protect ourselves from ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you want to go to the next slide, Jose? Yeah, so, key outcomes, we've, peppered these through our conversation here, but, I think that obviously the outcomes are, that reduction in operational support, you understand the total cost of an application. Again, I'll go back to the governance structure that comes out of this. Never having to be back into that same place where you are when you start the project, and having the pieces of the puzzle put together so that you have a sustainable process and that full catalog of inventory. I think that's most impactful. Again, having to avoid the situation again in the future. What are your thoughts, you guys?
Yeah, the governance is huge to be able to really control what's coming in and out of the environment. And again, giving everybody a seat at the table so they can, voice their concern or opinion of why an application is a good fit or why it's not meeting the needs of the business unit. The inventory, I think, Jose, you made the point earlier, it's just impossible to do without the interviews and having, again, those conversations and everybody having a seat at the table to be able to understand what's out there. Some of that stuff's cloud hosted. It's been procured without us knowing it. So you have to flush that out through good old-fashioned interviews.
So do you suggest maybe doing some sort of periodical audit somehow?
Yeah, you would want it to be an iterative process to, once you've got the framework, we've mentioned that word now 47 times. Once you have that in place and everything up and running, you have to kind of make sure that you're staying on top of it.
Yeah, well, I just want to let the audience know that today's episode has been brought to you by the word framework.
And actually, if anybody has any questions, feel free to post those in the Q&A. I just think that this type of project, from just the cost savings perspective, and again, I go back to the rapid response that often really results in procurement of a new application to solve an immediate problem. It's just it happens, right? It happens. Organizations have then a large inventory of software applications across their infrastructure. They don't even realize they're there because it's solving some one problem that arose. And also, over the course of time, as our applications evolve, you guys look at what's happened with Microsoft Teams over the course of the past 6 months. Wow. Look at the add-ons and the additions that have now come within Teams. We can now take an organization that rapidly deployed Zoom because of X, Y, and Z, and they're already paying for Microsoft Teams under their EAs, but yet now they're paying for a Zoom enterprise license. Just that quick little rationalization as to what's missing in one tool over another, and is that enough to keep both applications in the environment? Yes or no? We don't know until we sit down and have conversations with stakeholders. We look at the new enhanced features and functionality, and so I think to your point, Mike and Jose, this is never really done once you get that full inventory.
No, and you say that, Emily, and I'm going to go ahead, since Mike has his Divergent hat on, I'm going to put mine on as well. No, as you, yeah. So no, so when COVID hit, when the need for remote work increased by 500%, you had companies out there that literally not only was just going to, let's say, like a Zoom or Microsoft Teams, they were using Teams and not knowing how to use it, right? Because it had been sitting there, right? And they had not quite implemented it just yet. Some people jumped on Zoom, and there's some requests that I get for, let's say, blue jeans or this or that, and it's just non-stop, where one company can look up and you have 4 different collaborative tools or meeting tools or what have you. And then, if you have a VP like Emily, she hunts and tracks all of those down to make sure you comply.
It's not just me.
Yeah. No, but see, that's the rationalization. So see, to me, that's a good practice, right? We see that, wait a minute, we're having other tools being used. Those tools cost money, right? We have the perfect tool, or what the tool that we've selected, whether it's perfect to others or not, or to the organization, but it works. And then our policy says this is what we use, right? So if you're operating outside of that policy, let's bring everything back into compliance, right? So that is actually I'm joking, but that's a perfect example of the sustain or sustainability, right? Maintaining compliance throughout the organization.
Yeah.
If you watch the pennies, the dollars will watch themselves, right?
Sure. Again, at least you didn't use a car metaphor.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, I think we have one more slide here just with some of our key takeaways. And I think we've, ultimately been talking about these. I love this topic. I love it. And I love application rationalization because of the positive impact it can make on an organization. I think it sparks conversation. I think, doing the right thing and helping to really, bring value to the organization. This is the perfect topic, right? It's not only that, the engagement with the end users, again, we run our scans and we get a great inventory with the technology piece, which is so important. And I think, Jose, you can probably speak to SCCM reporting better than any of us on this call. Just the ever evolving evolution of the reports and, kind of the scans that can come out of that, but just keeping a pulse on how the end users are needing to use the applications in the environment, the whys behind it, the need. It keeps also the end users engaged, I think, in driving excitement for the project, making sure that we understand what's out there. And I just think that the people component along with this application rationalization projects are just, it's really it's just fun. What do you guys think?
Yeah, Mike, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on how fun this is.
It's nice to know. Well, it's nice to know how folks are using the tools that they have in the organizations. I mean, they may have found a way to use a particular tool that you hadn't anticipated. So we do the personas when we're capturing that information to kind of understand the workflow within a business, and it is kind of fun. It's interesting to see how the tools are leveraged within the organization to get accommodate those workflows, especially if you're bringing in a new tool or evaluating other tools in the environment to make sure that they are relevant, or hey, this one can do XYZ and it can also accommodate the workflow that we're trying to do over here in marketing or whatever that is, where they find a unique way to use the tool. So it is interesting to me. I do enjoy that part of it.
I think it is interesting. What gets me is the modern transformation piece, right? So we have best practice, right? And we go into every project and we keep best practice in mind, right? As we collect enough information doing our requirements gathering to begin to plan and design a solution, right, for the client, right? So I think that doing every project, every time I go in and do a Windows operating system deployment migration or Office 365 or Teams or application rationalization, which to me is a big beast of a project, I learn enough, like Mike said, learning how the organization uses the software, right, and their practices and their makeup. I don't know, for me, it makes me learn just a little bit more, get a little bit more creative so that we can maintain that thread of modern transformation. I mean, we're in the age of transformation, right? So things will continue to change. But in order to facilitate that change, we have to maintain things like the application rationalization. That's probably a project where it's big at one point in time, but it's just maintenance there, moving forward, right? But there are other projects where things will continue to change. I mean, look at Windows 10 and how it's changing, right? Whereas there used to be big deployment projects, now it's just a matter of possibly setting some provisioning packages or, sending provisioning over Intune over the internet. But things are transforming in a way where there used to be, mostly on premise, and now they have many companies going to the cloud. So things will be in a constant state of transformation, right? There's always going to be more deltas at this point than things that stay the same. So
let me ask you guys a question. I just thought about something when you're talking about this. There's no right or wrong reason, but I think there's a varying. So we talk about governance, right? We talk about the architecture review and making sure that if a new application comes in the environment, we're cataloging it. But do you think it's good practice to package every application in your tool set? So SCCM, is it good practice to truly, if it's going on one PC, do you think it should be packaged?
all day, every day.
You think so?
That PC will break down. That PC will have to be retired one day, right? Or a second user may get that same software. And it could be a software that you get a single license for, right? So the single license can be held at the department level, but we can deploy the software out, right? I mean, the key to lowering the maintenance costs, right, is in an IT environment is one of the things we look at is support, right? So how can we lower the cost of support? Well, we can sustain something if we build it and make them all the same. That's why we create one image for the environment, and all workstations get that image with core applications. All those applications have been tested and vetted, right? So they get a set of applications with the same operating system deployed. There are group policy is in effect, right? So now that kind of manages the workstation. So we know exactly how it's going to behave. If IT does not know how it's going to behave, that's an issue. That's a support call. That's multiple support calls, right? But if we set it somehow the first time, which is in the design, and we plan it out and we put it in place, now we can maintain it. But when you have these one-offs here and there, you start forgetting about those, and they begin to build up, and then that's where you'll have a problem. And support is something that we always have to look at, because that's how we come up with our metrics, right? In IT.
Yeah, Mike.
I think if you don't package them, you're creating that siloed environment. So if you're going to put the onus on an application analyst to maintain those installs and keep them up to date, then you've taken IT out of the picture completely, or whatever governing body is in charge of making sure that this rationalization stays current and relevant. So to me, that's a big thing. Visibility and transparency as to what's out there and why it's out there, and then again, who's maintaining it. But also, I think having everything packaged, it's quantifiable. So you can go and look and say, okay, well we have 3,600 applications that are packaged and maintained and ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. So you can actually put those hard and fast numbers on there, and you can actually show pretty quickly what you've got in the environment. So I'm definitely an advocate for keeping all that stuff cataloged and packaged and ready to go. And then to your point, Jose, we need to know how it works and how it behaves if we're going to support it.
Yeah, can I just add something though? It made me think of something. I do believe that when it comes to anything in the core applications, I think it's important to have application owners, right? And I think they need to be more involved. And there should be some onus on them when these specialty applications need a change or they fail or whatever have you, right? I think they should be more involved.
I think actually, honestly, my opinion is that every application should have an owner, and that as you're cataloging your applications through your application rationalization project, if you don't know who that owner is, that's a key time to identify one and make sure that they understand their area of responsibility, because I think that's where some of the applications get in trouble, is that they don't have an owner that is championing for the reason why it's in the environment or its purpose. So I have to strongly agree with you.
Yeah, we're not, but IT cannot learn every single software application, especially those that, we brought up, Mike, let's say radiology. Radiology may require a certain application, right? We're not going to learn every application that's out there, especially the specialty ones, right? There's your core applications, and then there's the broader scale applications, and we're going to have a certain amount of knowledge over those. But like those big global GPS applications that I would install, sometimes even manually with a set of 5 or 6 DVDs.
Yeah.
Back in the day. I mean, you're not going to know how this actually works. I mean, that's why when we install those types of things and we want to package it, we actually bring in a business user or aka application owner, because
Yep.
they need to work it to see if we can actually test it. Me installing it on a VM, all that tells me is that, okay, it will install on this operating system, but then we need someone who uses that application to come out and test it, and then maybe even test it for a few days, right, to see if it will work, right? So you need an application owner, like Emily says, probably for every application. And I think it's not to kind of pass the buck. I think it's to make it work better, make the entire process work better.
And we're out of time. Just one more thing too.
Yeah.
Say to your point, by doing so and identifying those owners, but when you're packaging those applications, you've also identified and documented any dependencies. So if that pack system needs Java, whatever 1.7 UU 118 or whatever the heck the numbers are at this point, that needs to be identified and documented, because there may be another piece of software that requires a different version of Java. And you have to be able to accommodate that in the environment. So that's really important.
Emily, will 30 seconds take us out?
Yeah, I know we're over time. I think honestly, you guys, we're gonna go to let's maybe talk about doing a YouTube live later on today to finish our conversation. Jose, I'm gonna ping you on that and have you set that up. I think we need to do something, because I think this is amazing conversation. I don't want us to stop having it. Obviously, application rationalization is a very hot topic, with great reason and great purpose behind it. So I thank you guys for joining me today. If there's any follow-up questions, we'll get to those and provide responses after we wrap up. But thanks, you guys, for being here with me and discussing this very awesome topic. I still think it's super fun, so you're going to have to just bear with me as we go through these projects this year.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.